Now we're going to talk about outliers and residuals. So we talked about outliers when we talked about descriptive statistics, and that's a data point that's far from the regular data. In regression, we think of outliers as being observed data points that are far from the least squared line or the regression line. They can have large errors where an error or residual is the vertical distance from the line to the point. So you'll see it in Minitab. They'll call them as either residuals or leverage points. And the leverage points means there's something about that value compared to the x-axis where the outliers and the residuals have to do with the distance from the y-axis. So outliers you got to look at carefully. Sometimes you'll keep them in the data, sometimes you'll remove them. You've got to be very, very delicate how you handle it. If you ever take an outlier out of a data set, you need to put why you did that, and you always need to track what you did. Because there's something in the industry called black swans, where before the Europeans or the UK went to Australia, they always thought that black swans were like rare, that they're never there. You may occasionally see a black swan. And when they finally went to Australia, they saw that there were black swans were very common. So just know that sometimes an outlier may look really unique and not happen, but in the grand scheme of things, it might be a trend you need to look at. And it's called the black swan. There's other things that we could talk about with outliers. You can think of them as events like we could look at like COVID-19 as an outlier in the different kinds of viruses that go around, like SARS and the flu. But if we look at from recorded time, pandemics are pretty common, and we can go back and track like the Black Plague and stuff. So think of outliers more than just data points. They can be points in time, they can be events, they can be things that we look at that way. So but for this class, you're going to look for it as a data value. But when you are in the real world, think about these. There might be things that are going on that are an underlying sign of bigger things. So again, you got to look at them closely. Outliers can happen because they actually happen. They can happen because of data collection. And that's another thing you have to be careful of. So when you're looking at outliers, we can have something beside outliers called influential points. And these can be far from the data value, and they can have a big effect on the slope of the regression line. So to identify an influential point, you have to remove it from the data set and see if the slope of the regression line changes significantly. Minitab and other calculators will identify outliers. Minitab does it beautifully for you, so you don't have to worry about it. In this class, we're not going to do a lot of removal of outliers. I'm going to show you in multiple regression how it might help change a model, but it's your call. If you know that data is valid and something's going on, keep it in there. If you think it's something like, the data was entered wrong or something, then take it out, but always remember to document. So how can we guess outliers at looking at a graph? Well, there's some guidelines. As a rule of thumb, we can flag any point that is located further than 2 standard deviations above or below the line of best fit. The standard deviation is the standard deviation of the residual of errors. If you go back to normal distribution, remember we talked about 95% of that data is going to fall between 2 standard deviations above and below the mean. So here you're going. You're looking for that 5% that's laying out there. So you can do this visually with a scatter plot by looking at the different stuff. But the great thing is Minitab does it for us. So we had an outlier in the grade data set where it was 65 and 175. So again, you can examine the data. If it's an error, you could delete it, but note it. If it's correct, leave it in there. So let me show you. When we go back to example 2, we did that data set, and go back and look at that. But I didn't put in one slide because I didn't want to confuse you yet. So look here. Minitab told us that for one of the observations where the height was 1,050 feet, there's something going on there. And it marked it as a large residual because that STDRSRESID, sorry, is 2.20. So in my final data set, I wouldn't take it out, but I would put that it's there. So Minitab was really good about telling you those things. For this class, I just want you to note them. That's it. That's it. In the real world, if you go on to more things in statistics, I suggest that I would look at a deeper dive of how to handle outliers, and there's books on it. I mean, it's one of those things that we talk about in statistics. It's just something you got to know, and you got to feel comfortable with what you're doing. But again, for this class, you're just going to look at them and identify them for me.